I'm so glad you're here. If you're watching this video, please like and subscribe to my channel and tell me in the comments where you're listening to my story from. I want to know how far it's traveled. My name is Sandra Mitchell, and I'm 44 years old. What I'm about to tell you will make you question every insurance company you've ever trusted. The day the jury awarded me $2.4 million in punitive damages, I sat in that Chicago courtroom and cried. Not tears of joy, though there was relief. These were tears for all the years I'd spent being called a liar, a faker, a fraud. Tears for the woman I'd been 3 years earlier. Terrified, broke, and convinced no one would ever believe that my invisible disability was real. Let me take you back to where this nightmare began. Back to May 2019, when I first noticed the silver Honda Civic parked across from my apartment building at odd hours. Back to the moment I realized a man was following me with a camera. Back to when I discovered that my own insurance company, the one I'd paid $127 every month for 10 years, had hired a private investigator to prove I was faking lupus. But to really understand this story, I need to go back even further. Back to 2014, when I was 34 years old, and my body started betraying me in ways I couldn't explain or understand. I was living in Chicago, working as a senior accountant at Morrison & Pierce, a mid-sized accounting firm in the Loop. I'd worked there for 8 years, starting as a junior accountant right out of college and working my way up. I made $78,000 a year. I had my own office with a window overlooking Michigan Avenue. I had a 401k, good health insurance, and that disability policy I never thought I'd need. My life wasn't glamorous, but it was stable, comfortable. I lived in a one-bedroom apartment in Lincoln Park that cost $1,400 a month. I had a routine: wake at 6, gym 3 times a week, at my desk by 8, home by 6, dinner with friends, or a book and wine on my couch. Weekends, I'd explore the city, visit the Art Institute, try new restaurants in neighborhoods I'd never been to. I grew up in Bloomington, Indiana, the daughter of a hardware store owner and a school librarian. My parents, Bill and Carol Mitchell, were solid middle-class people who believed in hard work, education, and planning for the future. They'd saved for years to help me through Indiana University. I was the first person in my family to get a 4-year degree. Sandy, my father told me at my college graduation in 2002, his voice thick with emotion. You've made us so proud. You have opportunities we never had. Don't waste them. I didn't waste them. I worked hard. I was reliable, detail-oriented, the person my supervisor Karen Matthews could count on for the difficult clients, the complex audits, the tight deadlines. I was being groomed for promotion to manager. My future looked bright. Then, slowly, everything started falling apart. It began with fatigue, not normal tiredness. This was different, profound, all-consuming. I'd wake up after 8 hours of sleep, feeling like I hadn't slept at all. By mid-afternoon, I'd struggle to keep my eyes open at my desk. I'd come home and collapse on my couch, too exhausted to make dinner, too tired even to change out of my work clothes. You're probably just stressed, my primary care doctor, Dr. Richards, said during my first appointment about it in early 2014. You work long hours. Maybe you need a vacation. I took a vacation. 1 week in Florida, sleeping 10 hours a night, lying on the beach, doing nothing. I came back feeling slightly better for about 3 days. Then the exhaustion returned, worse than before. Next came the joint pain. My fingers would ache when I typed. My knees hurt when I climbed the 3 flights of stairs to my apartment. My wrists throbbed. Some mornings my hands were so stiff I couldn't grip my coffee mug properly. Maybe it's early arthritis, Dr. Richards suggested. Try ibuprofen. Do some stretching exercises. The ibuprofen barely touched the pain. The stretching made it worse. Then came the rashes, red, scaly patches across my cheeks and the bridge of my nose, spreading in a distinctive butterfly shape. They'd appear suddenly, especially after I'd been in the sun. They were ugly, embarrassing. I started wearing more makeup to cover them, but my colleagues noticed anyway. Sandy, what's wrong with your face? My coworker Jennifer asked me one day in the break room, her voice loud enough for 3 other people to hear. Just a rash, probably an allergy or something. But I knew it wasn't an allergy. Something was seriously wrong. Over the next 18 months, I saw 12 different doctors. My primary care physician, a dermatologist for the rashes, a rheumatologist who ran some tests that came back normal, an endocrinologist to check my thyroid, a neurologist to rule out MS, an infectious disease specialist to test for Lyme disease. Each one ran their tests, found nothing definitive, and suggested I see someone else. Your labs are mostly normal, they'd say. Maybe it's stress. Have you considered seeing a therapist? I did see a therapist. Dr. Angela Park was a clinical psychologist who specialized in chronic illness. After 3 sessions, she looked at me seriously and said, "Sandra, I don't think this is psychological. Yes, you're depressed, but I think you're depressed because you're sick and no one will believe you. That's not the same as your symptoms being caused by depression." Then what's wrong with me? I don't know, but I think you need to keep looking for a doctor who will take you seriously. By early 2016, my life was falling apart. I was missing work regularly, 2, sometimes 3 days a month when the fatigue and pain were so bad I physically could not get out of bed. I'd used all my sick days. I'd burned through my vacation time. I was starting to take unpaid leave. Karen, my supervisor, called me into her office in March 2016. She was 52, a tough but fair woman who'd mentored me for years. But that day, her expression was concerned and frustrated in equal measure. "Sandy, we need to talk about your attendance." "I know, I'm sorry, I've been sick." "You've been sick for 2 years. You've missed 37 days of work in the past 12 months. That's nearly 2 months. I've tried to be understanding, but this is affecting the entire team. Your colleagues are having to cover your accounts. We're missing deadlines." My throat tightened. "I'm doing the best I can. I come in whenever I possibly can. I work from home when I know you're trying. But Sandy, this is a business. We need people we can rely on. If you're too sick to work, maybe you need to be on medical leave or disability. But we can't keep operating like this." "Are you firing me?" "Not yet, but I need to see significant improvement in your attendance over the next 3 months, or we'll have to reconsider your position." I left her office fighting back tears. I wasn't faking. I wasn't lazy. I was legitimately sick with something no doctor could identify or treat. And now I was on the verge of losing my job. That night, I called my mother. "Mom, I don't know what to do. The doctors can't figure out what's wrong. Work is threatening to fire me. I'm exhausted all the time. I hurt all the time. What if I really am just crazy? What if everyone's right and this is all in my head?" My mother, who'd always been the practical one, the voice of reason, said something I'll never forget. "Sandra Marie Mitchell, you are the most honest, hard-working person I know. If you say you're sick, you're sick. Don't you dare let anyone convince you otherwise. Now, hang up this phone and find a doctor who will figure this out." The next day, I made an appointment with Dr. Patricia Okonkwo, a rheumatologist at Northwestern Memorial Hospital who'd been recommended by a friend of a friend. The first available appointment was 6 weeks away in May 2016. I took it. Those 6 weeks were torture. I was deteriorating. The fatigue was so severe some days that I'd sleep for 14, 16 hours and still wake up exhausted. The joint pain had spread. Now my shoulders, my hips, my ankles all ached constantly. The butterfly rash on my face was permanent now, angry and red. I'd developed mouth sores that made eating painful. My hair was falling out in clumps. I was 36 years old, and I felt like I was dying. When I finally met Dr. Okonkwo in May 2016, she spent 90 minutes with me. 90 minutes. No other doctor had given me more than 20. She asked detailed questions about every symptom, when it started, how often it occurred, what made it better or worse. She did a thorough physical examination. She reviewed all my previous test results from the other doctors. "Sandra," she said when the examination was complete, "I'm going to order a comprehensive panel of blood tests. I think you might have systemic lupus erythematosus, SLE. It's an autoimmune disease where your immune system attacks your own tissues. It's notoriously difficult to diagnose because the symptoms vary so much and lab tests can be normal in early stages. Is there a cure? No, but there are treatments that can control it. If this is lupus, we can help you." 2 weeks later, she called me back to her office. I sat across from her desk, my hands trembling. "Sandra, your ANA test is strongly positive. Your anti-dsDNA antibodies are elevated, your complement levels are low, your SED rate is high. Combined with your clinical symptoms, the fatigue, joint pain, rash, mouth sores, photosensitivity, you meet the diagnostic criteria for systemic lupus erythematosus." I should have felt relieved to finally have an answer. Instead, I felt terrified. "What does that mean? Can I still work?" Dr. Okonkwo's face was compassionate but honest. "That depends. Lupus is unpredictable. Some people have mild cases and live relatively normal lives with medication. Others have severe cases with frequent flares, periods when the disease becomes very active, that make regular employment difficult or impossible. We'll start you on hydroxychloroquine, which is the standard first-line treatment. We'll monitor you closely, and we'll see how you respond." "How will I know if it's working?" "If it works, you should have less fatigue, less joint pain, fewer rashes. The goal is to get you into remission, a state where the disease is quiet and controlled. But even with treatment, most lupus patients have flares. Stress, infections, sun exposure, even hormonal changes can trigger them." I started on hydroxychloroquine, Plaquenil, 200 milligrams twice daily. Within 6 weeks, I noticed some improvement. The constant crushing fatigue lessened to mere tiredness. The joint pain became more manageable. I could function again, at least partially, but I still wasn't well enough to work full-time. I'd have good weeks where I could mostly keep up, then bad weeks where I could barely get out of bed. My attendance at work didn't improve enough to satisfy Karen. In September 2016, I had my first serious flare. It hit suddenly. One day, I was functional. The next day, I woke up with excruciating joint pain, a high fever, a rash covering my chest and arms, and fatigue so profound I couldn't lift my head off the pillow. I spent 4 days in bed, barely able to move. When I returned to work the following Monday, Karen called me into her office again. "Sandy, I've tried to be patient, but this isn't working. Your absences are increasing, not decreasing. I need someone reliable in this position. I have a diagnosis now. I'm on treatment. I'm doing everything. I believe you're sick. I really do. But that doesn't change the fact that we need someone who can be here consistently. I'm sorry, Sandy, but we're going to have to let you go." The termination was effective November 1st, 2016. They gave me 60 days of severance pay. My health insurance would continue through COBRA if I paid the premiums, $720 per month. And they reminded me that I had disability insurance through my employer's group plan with Guardian Shield Insurance Company. Guardian Shield. The company I'd been paying $127 a month to for 8 years. $12,192 I'd paid in premiums, money I'd never expected to need to use. Now it was my only lifeline. I filed my disability claim in mid-November 2016. The policy was clear. After a 90-day waiting period, if I was unable to work due to illness or injury, Guardian Shield would pay me 60% of my pre-disability income until I could return to work or until I reached age 65. 60% of $78,000 was $46,800 annually, or $3,900 per month. After deducting the premium I no longer had to pay, the benefit would be $3,200 per month. It wasn't great. I'd have to budget carefully, but it was survivable. I could pay my rent, my COBRA premiums, my medications, my basic expenses. The claim packet was extensive. I had to provide detailed information about my condition, my symptoms, my limitations. Dr. Okonkwo had to fill out multiple forms documenting my diagnosis, treatment, and functional capacity. I had to submit medical records going back 2 years. I had to sign releases allowing Guardian Shield to obtain any additional records they wanted. I submitted everything in December 2016 and waited. In February 2017, Guardian Shield sent me a letter requesting additional information. They wanted updated records from Dr. Okonkwo. They wanted records from my primary care physician. They wanted an attending physician statement with even more detailed information about my restrictions and limitations. I provided everything they requested. In April 2017, 5 months after I'd filed my claim, Guardian Shield approved my benefits. The letter said, "Based on our review of the medical information provided, we have determined that you meet the definition of disability under your policy. Your monthly benefit of $3,200 will begin effective February 1st, 2017, retroactive to the end of your 90-day waiting period." I received a check for $9,600 covering February, March, and April. Then, monthly checks began arriving: May, June, July, August. Each month, like clockwork, $3,200 appeared in my bank account. For the first time since getting sick, I could breathe. I wasn't cured. I still had lupus, still had flares, still struggled, but at least I had financial stability. I could focus on managing my health without the terror of losing my apartment or being unable to afford my medications. I settled into a new routine. I saw Dr. Okonkwo every 3 months for monitoring. We adjusted my medications, added prednisone during flares, tried different doses of hydroxychloroquine, eventually added methotrexate as a second immunosuppressant when the hydroxychloroquine alone wasn't enough. Some weeks I felt almost normal, other weeks I could barely function. I kept a detailed symptom diary, documenting every day: pain level on a scale of 1 to 10, fatigue level, specific symptoms, activities I could manage, medications I took. My therapist had recommended it as a way to identify patterns and triggers. It became my routine. Every evening before bed, I'd write in my journal. November the 15th, 2017. Pain, 7 out of 10. Fatigue, 8 out of 10. Barely got out of bed today. Rash flaring on face and chest. Took extra prednisone as prescribed. Managed to make toast for breakfast. Couldn't shower. Too exhausted. Slept 14 hours. November 22nd, 2017. Pain, 3 out of 10. Fatigue, 4 out of 10. Good day. Went to grocery store. Took 40 minutes. Had to rest twice. Made simple dinner. Watched TV. Felt almost human. The pattern was clear. I had cycles. Good days, bad days, terrible days. The good days were never normal by healthy standards. Even on my best days, I couldn't have worked an 8-hour shift. But they were functional. I could shower, make food, maybe run one errand if it was essential. In August 2018, I received a letter from Guardian Shield that made my stomach drop. They were conducting a routine review of my claim. They needed updated medical records from Dr. Okonkwo, a new attending physician statement, and something called an independent medical examination, or IME. The letter explained that an IME was an examination by a physician chosen by Guardian Shield to provide an objective, independent assessment of my medical condition and functional capacity. The appointment was scheduled for September 25, 2018, at a medical office in Oak Brook, a suburb west of Chicago. I called Dr. Okonkwo immediately. "They're making me see another doctor. Is this normal?" Unfortunately, yes. Insurance companies often request IMEs when they're considering terminating benefits. The doctor they choose is usually someone who does these examinations frequently for insurance companies. So they're not really independent? No, not in any meaningful sense. These doctors make hundreds of thousands of dollars annually from insurance company referrals. They have a financial incentive to find claimants capable of working. What should I do? Be honest about your symptoms. Don't minimize your pain or fatigue trying to appear tough. Don't push yourself to do things during the exam that would cause you problems later. And understand that no matter what you say or do, this doctor may find you capable of working, because that's what he's paid to do. The IME was scheduled for 2:00 p.m. on September 25th, right in the middle of what were typically my worst hours. Mornings I was usually better, afternoons I deteriorated. Whether that was intentional on Guardian Shield's part, I didn't know. The examining physician was Dr. Richard Castellano. His office was in a generic medical building, sterile and impersonal. The waiting room had no other patients, just me, sitting alone, terrified. Dr. Castellano was about 60, gray-haired, with the brisk efficiency of someone who did these examinations constantly. He spent exactly 22 minutes with me. I know because I checked my phone before and after. He asked me basic questions. What brings you here today? As if I'd chosen to come. What are your symptoms? What medications are you taking? He asked me to perform simple physical tasks, raise my arms overhead, touch my toes, walk across the room, grip his hands with mine. That day, September 25, 2018, happened to be a relatively good day for me. I was in the middle of one of my better stretches. The tasks he asked me to do were things I could manage for brief periods. I raised my arms. I bent over, though my joints protested. I walked across the room without obvious difficulty. I gripped his hands, though my fingers ached. What he didn't ask about: how long could I sustain those activities? How would I feel tomorrow after doing them? What were my bad days like? How often did I have flares? Could I work an 8-hour day? Could I concentrate through brain fog? Could I meet deadlines when fatigue made thinking feel like wading through cement? He glanced at some of my medical records. I saw him flip through maybe 3 or 4 pages. He asked no follow-up questions about my documented flares, my hospitalizations, my medication changes. After 22 minutes, he said, "Okay, we're done here. Guardian Shield will receive my report in about 2 weeks." That was it. 22 minutes with a doctor who'd never seen me before, examining me on one of my better days, performing tasks that bore no resemblance to the demands of full-time employment. I walked out of that office knowing I was in trouble. 3 weeks later, in mid-October 2018, I received a certified letter from Guardian Shield. My benefits were being terminated, effective November 1st, 2018. The reason given: based on the independent medical examination conducted by Dr. Richard Castellano and our comprehensive review of your medical file, we have determined that you no longer meet the definition of disability under your policy. Dr. Castellano's evaluation demonstrates that you retain the functional capacity to perform sedentary work activities. Therefore, you are capable of returning to your own occupation as an accountant. I read that letter 3 times, each time feeling more panicked. They were cutting me off. After nearly 2 years of benefits, after I'd paid premiums for 8 years, after I'd provided mountains of medical documentation proving my disability, they were declaring me capable of working based on a 22-minute exam on a good day. I had $4,200 in my bank account. My rent was $1,400. My medications cost $1,100 per month, even with insurance. My COBRA premium was $720. Just those 3 expenses alone totaled $3,220, more than I had. And I still needed food, utilities, transportation, phone service. Without the disability benefits, I'd be broke in 2 months, maybe 3 if I stopped paying for COBRA and went without health insurance. But then my medication costs would quadruple. I was terrified, devastated, and furious. I called Guardian Shield's claims department immediately. After being transferred 4 times, I finally reached claims specialist Monica Chen. "Ms. Chen, there's been a mistake. I'm still disabled. I'm still having flares. I can't work full-time. According to the independent medical examination, you're capable of performing sedentary work. That doctor saw me for 20 minutes on a good day. That's not representative of my condition. Lupus is episodic. Some days I'm functional, other days I can't get out of bed. If you disagree with our decision, you have the right to file an appeal. You have 180 days from the date of the termination letter to submit additional medical information supporting your claim. I've already submitted extensive medical information. Dr. Okonkwo has documented everything. The appeal is your opportunity to provide any additional information you believe we should consider. The appeals process typically takes 4 to 6 months. 4 to 6 months. I'd be homeless by then. I'd have no money for medications. I'd probably be dead." That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. How could they do this? How could they deny benefits based on 22 minutes with a doctor I'd never seen before? A doctor who hadn't asked about my bad days, my flares, my actual functional limitations? The next morning, I started researching disability attorneys. I found several who specialized in ERISA cases, the federal law governing employer-sponsored insurance plans. Most offered free consultations. I called 5 attorneys. 4 of them said essentially the same thing. ERISA cases are extremely difficult. The insurance company has broad discretion to make benefits decisions. Courts defer to those decisions unless they are arbitrary and capricious, which is a very high standard. Even if I won, I'd only get the benefits they owed me. No punitive damages, no compensation for the stress and harm they'd caused. The 5th attorney was different. His name was David Park. He was 48, Korean American, a former federal prosecutor who'd switched to representing plaintiffs in disability and insurance, bad faith cases after his own mother had been wrongfully denied long-term care benefits she'd paid for. "Ms. Mitchell," he said during our phone consultation, "I'm not going to sugarcoat this. ERISA cases are stacked heavily against claimants. The insurance companies write the policies, make the initial decisions, choose the independent examiners, decide the appeals. And even if we sue, the court usually only reviews the administrative record, the documents that existed when they made their decision. We can't introduce new evidence. We can't have a jury hear your testimony. It's brutally unfair." So I should just give up? I didn't say that. I said it's difficult, but there are exceptions. If we can prove Guardian Shield acted in bad faith, that they knew their decision was wrong but denied your claim anyway to save money, we might be able to get around some of ERISA's limitations. We might be able to sue under state law for fraud or bad faith breach of contract. That would allow us to seek punitive damages and have a jury trial. How do we prove bad faith? We'd need to show a pattern that Guardian Shield systematically targets claimants with invisible disabilities like lupus, that they use biased IME examiners who almost always find people capable of working, that they ignore contrary medical evidence, that they have financial incentives to deny claims. It's a high bar, but I've seen cases where we've cleared it. What do I do? First, we file a comprehensive appeal. We get detailed letters from Dr. Okonkwo and any other treating physicians. We submit your symptom diary showing the frequency of your bad days. We get statements from people who've observed your limitations, friends, family, neighbors. We make the administrative record as strong as possible. And if they deny the appeal, then we sue. And while the lawsuit is pending, we do discovery. We force Guardian Shield to produce their internal files, their communications with Dr. Castellano, their claims handling procedures, their financial data. We look for evidence of bad faith, and if we find it, we go to trial. I hired David that day. His retainer was $5,000, money I didn't have. My parents lent it to me over my protests. "Sandy," my father said when he wired the money, "you paid for that insurance for 8 years. They owe you those benefits. Fight for what's yours." David and I spent the next 2 months preparing the appeal. Dr. Okonkwo wrote a detailed 10-page letter explaining lupus, its episodic nature, my specific symptoms and limitations, why a 22-minute examination couldn't possibly assess my true functional capacity. She included research studies showing that lupus patients often appear deceptively functional during brief evaluations, but cannot sustain that functioning over time. We submitted my symptom diary covering the entire 2 years since my diagnosis. It showed a clear pattern. Approximately 40% of days were bad days where I could barely function. 40% were moderate days where I could do limited activities, and only 20% were relatively good days. Even on good days, I noted, I couldn't work 8 hours. I'd be exhausted after 2 or 3 hours of sustained cognitive work. My mother wrote a statement describing what she'd observed during her visits, the days she'd found me unable to get out of bed, the times she'd had to help me shower because I was too weak and in too much pain to do it myself, the meals she'd had to prepare because I couldn't stand long enough to cook. My friend Jessica, who I'd known since college, wrote about the social activities I'd had to cancel, the times she'd come over to find me crying from pain and fatigue, the gradual withdrawal from normal life as the disease took over. We submitted everything in January 2019. Then, we waited. And waited. The appeal sat at Guardian Shield for 4 months. 4 months during which I survived on borrowed money from my parents, on credit cards I knew I couldn't pay back, on the generosity of friends who covered meals and helped with expenses. 4 months during which I rationed my medications, skipping doses to make them last longer, knowing I was making my disease worse, but having no other choice. In May 2019, Guardian Shield denied my appeal. The denial letter was formulaic, impersonal. We have carefully reviewed all materials submitted in support of your appeal, including the letter from Dr. Okonkwo and your symptom diary. While we acknowledge that you have been diagnosed with lupus, the medical evidence does not support a finding of total disability. The independent medical examination demonstrates that you retain the functional capacity for sedentary work. Accordingly, we uphold our decision to terminate your benefits effective November 1st, 2018. They were calling me a liar. They were saying that despite 2 years of documented illness, despite extensive medical records, despite multiple treating physicians confirming my disability, I was capable of working. They were saying that a 22-minute exam by a doctor who'd never seen me before was more credible than 2 years of treatment notes from my rheumatologist. When I showed David the denial letter, he was angry, but not surprised. This is what they do. They deny, delay, and defend. They count on people giving up because they run out of money or energy or hope. But we're not giving up. Now we sue. We filed the lawsuit in federal court in June 2019. The complaint alleged that Guardian Shield had wrongfully denied my claim in violation of ERISA, that their decision was arbitrary and capricious, and, most importantly, that they had acted in bad faith by systematically using biased IME examiners and deliberately ignoring medical evidence in order to deny benefits and increase profits. That last part was crucial. If we could prove bad faith, we might be able to escape ERISA's limitations and sue under Illinois state law, which would allow us to seek punitive damages and have a jury trial. Guardian Shield's attorneys filed a motion to dismiss the bad faith claims, arguing that ERISA preempted them. Judge Margaret Walsh, a federal district court judge known for being tough but fair, denied their motion. She wrote, "Plaintiff has alleged sufficient facts to state a claim for bad faith breach of contract under Illinois law. Whether these claims are ultimately preempted by ERISA will be determined after discovery once the full factual record is developed." That was huge. It meant we'd get discovery, the chance to force Guardian Shield to produce internal documents, emails, financial records, information about their relationship with Dr. Castellano, data about how often they denied claims for invisible disabilities. But it also meant the case would take a long time. Discovery alone would take months, maybe a year. A trial, if we got that far, might not happen for 2 years. I had to survive that long. My parents helped as much as they could, but they were retired and living on modest pensions. They couldn't support me indefinitely. I moved out of my Lincoln Park apartment. $1,400 a month was impossible without income, and into a tiny studio in a less safe neighborhood for $750. I sold my furniture, I sold my car, I applied for food stamps and Medicaid. The irony was crushing. I was living in poverty, struggling to afford basic necessities because an insurance company was refusing to pay benefits I'd earned by paying premiums for 8 years. And then, in the summer of 2019, things got strange, and then scary. It started in late June. I noticed a silver Honda Civic parked across from my new apartment building at odd hours. Same car, same spot, different times of day. Morning, afternoon, evening. Sometimes I'd see someone sitting in the driver's seat, but the angle and the sun glare made it impossible to see details. At first I thought I was being paranoid. My therapist had warned me that the stress of the lawsuit and financial situation might trigger anxiety. Maybe I was imagining patterns that weren't there. But then I started seeing the same man. 40s, average height, khaki pants, polo shirts, different colors, but always the same style. He'd be at the coffee shop when I went for my morning walk, at the library when I went to use the internet, outside the grocery store when I did my weekly shopping. One Saturday in early July, I decided to test it. I left my apartment and walked toward the park 3 blocks away. I took a deliberately random route, left, right again, doubling back. The man in khaki pants followed every turn. When I stopped to look in a store window, he stopped to tie his shoe. When I walked faster, he walked faster. My heart was pounding. This wasn't paranoia. Someone was actively following me. I hurried back to my apartment, my joints screaming in protest at the fast pace, and immediately called David. "Someone's following me. A man in a silver Honda Civic. He's been outside my building multiple times, and today he followed me." David sighed, and I could hear both sympathy and resignation in his voice. "Sandra, I need to tell you something. Guardian Shield has hired a private investigator to conduct surveillance on you." My blood ran cold. "What?" "It's standard practice in disability cases, especially when there's litigation. They hire investigators to follow claimants, film them going about their daily activities, hoping to catch them doing something, anything, that contradicts their claim of disability." "But I haven't done anything wrong. I'm just living my life." That's the problem. When you have an invisible disability, living your life looks like being healthy to someone who doesn't understand your condition. If you walk to the grocery store, they'll film you walking. If you carry a bag of groceries, they'll film you lifting. If you meet a friend for coffee and smile and laugh, they'll film that. Then, they'll take that footage to a judge and say, "Look, she's not disabled. She can walk, lift, socialize. She's fine." That's insane. Walking to the store once doesn't mean I can work 40 hours a week. I know, but insurance companies count on judges and juries not understanding the difference. They count on people thinking that disability means you're completely bedridden, that if you can do anything at all, you must be faking. What should I do? Document everything. Keep your symptom diary even more detailed. Note every activity and exactly how it affects you afterward. Film yourself on bad days if you can stomach it. I know it's degrading and humiliating, but we need to show the reality. And be very careful. Assume you're being watched whenever you leave your apartment. Over the following weeks, the surveillance intensified. The Honda Civic became a constant presence. I'd see it when I left for doctor appointments, when I walked to the corner store, when I just sat on my building's front steps because I was too exhausted to do anything else. The man in khaki pants, I started thinking of him as Khaki Man, was everywhere. Once I was in my building's lobby checking my mail when I looked up and saw him standing directly across the street, not even trying to hide, with what looked like a camera with a telephoto lens pointed at me through the glass door. I started feeling like a prisoner in my own life. Every time I left my apartment, I wondered, is he filming this? Will this be used against me? What if I'm having a good day and I look too functional? What if I push myself to do something normal and they claim that means I can work? The psychological toll was immense. I was already dealing with a chronic illness, poverty, and the stress of litigation. Now I had the added burden of constant surveillance, of feeling watched and judged every moment I was visible to the outside world. My therapist, Dr. Park, helped me process it. "Sandra, what they're doing is a form of harassment. They're trying to intimidate you into dropping the lawsuit. Don't let them." "But what if they get footage of me looking functional?" "What if? Then we'll contextualize it. We'll show that those were your best moments during your best days. We'll show what your worst days look like. We'll show the full reality, not their edited version." In late July 2019, I decided to do something that brought me a small bit of peace. I planted tomatoes. I had a tiny patio area behind my studio apartment, barely 6 feet by 4 feet, just enough space for a few containers. I'd always loved gardening. My mother had taught me when I was a child, and there was something therapeutic about putting my hands in soil, nurturing something living, watching it grow. I knew I was being watched, but I refused to let Guardian Shield take everything from me. If I felt well enough to plant some tomatoes, I was going to plant some tomatoes. It was a Sunday afternoon, July 28th. I was having one of my better stretches, not great, but functional. I'd bought 6 tomato seedlings at the farmer's market the day before, along with potting soil and containers. I set everything up on my patio and got to work. I worked slowly, carefully, mindfully. Plant a seedling, rest for 5 minutes. Fill a container with soil, rest for 10 minutes. My joints ached, my hands trembled slightly, but it felt good to be doing something normal, something that connected me to who I'd been before lupus took over my life. The entire process took about 90 minutes. When I finished, I was exhausted. My joints were screaming. I went inside, took my medications, and collapsed on my couch. I spent the rest of that day and all of the next day recovering. The overexertion had triggered increased pain and fatigue that lasted 48 hours, but I didn't regret it. I'd planted tomatoes. I'd done something that made me feel human. What I didn't know was that the investigator had filmed the entire thing, and what his footage would show, after careful, deliberate editing, was me appearing to work vigorously for 90 minutes, bending, lifting, kneeling, with no visible signs of difficulty or pain. All my rest breaks, edited out. All my grimaces of pain, cut. All my slow, careful movements, sped up slightly to look more energetic. The 2 days I spent in bed afterward, not mentioned. What remained was about 12 minutes of edited footage, showing me apparently engaging in sustained physical labor without any problems. In late September 2019, Guardian Shield's attorneys filed a motion for summary judgment in our lawsuit. Summary judgment meant they were asking Judge Walsh to rule in their favor without a trial, arguing that there were no disputed facts that required a jury to decide. Their brief was devastating. It argued that the surveillance video conclusively demonstrates that I was capable of sustained physical activity, that my claims of disabling fatigue and pain were contradicted by objective evidence, and that Guardian Shield's decision to terminate my benefits was not only reasonable, but compelled by the evidence. And attached to the brief was the video. 12 minutes of me apparently gardening without difficulty. David called me the moment he received it. "Sandra, they have surveillance video of you. Have you been doing any physical activities outside? I planted some tomatoes in July on my patio. It took me 90 minutes and I had to rest constantly. I was in bed for 2 days afterward." That's not what their video shows. They've edited it to make it look like you were working continuously without any problems. It's 12 minutes of footage that makes you look completely functional. My stomach dropped. Can they do that? Can they just edit out all the parts that show my limitations? Legally, it's a gray area. They'll argue they're just showing representative footage, but it's deceptive as hell, and that's what we're going to prove. David filed a response opposing the summary judgment motion. We argued that the surveillance video was deliberately misleading, that it showed only my best moments during my best weeks, that it ignored the episodic nature of lupus, and that 12 minutes of edited footage couldn't possibly represent my overall functional capacity. We also filed something called a motion to compel discovery. David wanted access to Guardian Shield's internal files, emails between claims examiners, communications with Dr. Castellano, training materials about handling lupus claims, data on how often they used surveillance video to deny benefits for invisible disabilities. Guardian Shield fought the discovery request hard. They claimed the documents were protected by attorney-client privilege, that they contained confidential business information, that the request was overly broad and burdensome. Judge Walsh held a hearing on the discovery dispute in November 2019. I attended, sitting in the gallery watching David argue against 3 attorneys from Guardian Shield's law firm. "Your Honor," David said, "plaintiff alleges that Guardian Shield systematically targets claimants with invisible disabilities, uses biased IME examiners who are financially dependent on insurance company referrals, and deliberately uses deceptively edited surveillance video to deny legitimate claims. These are serious allegations of bad faith. To prove them, plaintiff needs access to Guardian Shield's internal communications and policies." Guardian Shield's lead attorney, a woman named Patricia Morrison who radiated expensive competence, countered, "Your Honor, plaintiff is on a fishing expedition. She wants to rummage through thousands of confidential documents, hoping to find something, anything, that might support her baseless allegations. The documents she seeks are protected, irrelevant, and overly burdensome to produce." Judge Walsh looked skeptical. "Counselor Morrison, if your client's claims handling practices are appropriate and above board, why are you so resistant to producing documents about those practices?" "It's not about hiding anything, Your Honor. It's about protecting confidential business information and attorney work product." "Ms. Morrison, I'm going to grant plaintiff's motion in part, Guardian Shield will produce all internal communications regarding Ms. Mitchell's claim, all financial records regarding payments to Dr. Castellano, all training materials related to surveillance video in disability cases, and a data set of all claims in the past 5 years where benefits were terminated based on surveillance video for claimants diagnosed with lupus, fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue syndrome, multiple sclerosis, or other episodic or invisible disabilities. You have 60 days to produce these materials. Patricia Morrison looked like she'd been slapped. Your Honor, that's thousands of pages. Then I suggest you get started. This hearing is adjourned. I wanted to hug David right there in the courtroom. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like we were fighting back effectively. 3 weeks later, FedEx delivered 7 boxes to David's office. Thousands of pages of documents, emails, spreadsheets, training manuals, claim files. David and his paralegal, a sharp young woman named Maria Rodriguez, spent weeks going through everything, and what they found was damning. Internal emails showed that Guardian Shield had a deliberate strategy for aggressively denying claims involving subjective conditions. One email from a senior vice president of claims stated, "Lupus, fibromyalgia, CFS, and similar conditions are prime targets for surveillance and IME. These are diagnoses based heavily on patient self-reporting and cannot be objectively verified. Video showing normal activities effectively rebut subjective complaints. Push examiners to use these tools early and often." Another training manual for claims examiners included a section titled Red Flag Claims that specifically listed autoimmune diseases, chronic pain conditions, and psychiatric disabilities as claims requiring heightened scrutiny and aggressive investigation. We found financial records showing Guardian Shield's relationship with Dr. Castellano. Over the previous 4 years, they'd paid him $1.8 million for approximately 3,600 IMEs. In 82% of those examinations, he'd found claimants capable of working. Guardian Shield knew these statistics. They chose him specifically because his reports almost always supported benefit terminations. Most damning of all, we found the investigator's original report about his surveillance of me. His name was Marcus Webb, a former police detective who now ran a private investigation firm. His report, submitted to Guardian Shield in August 2019, told a very different story than the edited video they'd shown in court. Webb's report stated, "Subject was observed for 6 weeks, from June 15th through July 26th, 2019. During this period, subject rarely left her apartment. Most days, subject appeared to remain inside entirely. On days when subject did leave apartment, activities were limited to brief trips, 10 to 30 minutes, to nearby locations, corner store, coffee shop, mailbox. Subject walked slowly, often stopped to rest, showed signs of pain and fatigue, hunched posture, careful movements, frequent sitting. On July 28th, subject engaged in gardening activity on back patio. Subject worked for approximately 90 minutes, planting 6 tomato plants. However, subject took frequent rest breaks, approximately every 8 to 10 minutes, showed visible signs of pain, grimacing, careful movements, and worked very slowly. After completing gardening, subject went inside and did not emerge again for 2 full days. Recommendation: video footage from July 28th should be presented with context regarding subject's typical activity level and the episodic nature of her condition. Footage is not representative of daily functioning and should not be characterized as showing subject's normal capabilities. Subject's activity level on July 28th was anomalous compared to typical observation period. Guardian Shield had received this report. They knew the video was misleading, and they'd used it anyway, deliberately ignoring their own investigators' warnings. David was jubilant when he called me. "Sandra, we've got them. They knew the video was deceptive and they used it anyway. This is textbook bad faith. We filed an amended complaint adding claims under Illinois state law for fraudulent misrepresentation, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and bad faith breach of contract. We attached the investigator's report and the internal emails as exhibits. Guardian Shield immediately moved to dismiss the new claims, arguing they were preempted by ERISA. but Judge Walsh denied the motion. She wrote, "Viewing the evidence in the light most favorable to plaintiff, a reasonable jury could find that defendant deliberately used video evidence it knew to be misleading in order to wrongfully deny a legitimate claim, and that such conduct constitutes fraud and bad faith separate from the ERISA claim itself. These state law claims will proceed." We were going to trial with a jury. The trial was originally scheduled for March 2020. Then COVID-19 hit and the world shut down. The trial was postponed to September 2020, then to March 2021 as the pandemic dragged on. Those 18 months of delay were brutal. I was surviving on loans from my parents, on credit card debt, on food stamps and Medicaid. I'd sold everything of value I owned. I was living in a studio apartment in a rough neighborhood, rationing my medications, skipping meals. By the time trial finally arrived in March 2021, I had $1,847 in my bank account. If we lost, I would have nothing. I'd probably have to file for bankruptcy. I might end up homeless. And I definitely wouldn't be able to afford my lupus medications, which meant my health would deteriorate catastrophically. Everything depended on the next 2 weeks. The trial began on March 15, 2021, in Judge Walsh's courtroom on the 14th floor of the Dirksen Federal Building in downtown Chicago. The jury consisted of 8 people, 5 women and 3 men, ranging in age from late 20s to early 70s. They would decide my fate. David's opening statement was powerful and clear. He told my story simply, chronologically, letting the facts speak for themselves. He explained what lupus was, how it affects people episodically, why a brief examination or brief video footage can't capture the reality of living with the disease. He explained how Guardian Shield had systematically targeted my claim, used a biased examiner, deliberately edited surveillance video, and ignored their own investigators' warnings. "Ladies and gentlemen," David concluded, "this case is about a billion-dollar insurance company that decided it was more profitable to deny a legitimate claim than to honor their obligation to a woman who had paid premiums faithfully for 8 years. They counted on Sandra being too sick, too poor, too exhausted to fight back. They were wrong." Guardian Shield's attorney, Patricia Morrison, gave an opening that was slick and professional. She painted me as someone who was exaggerating symptoms, who wanted to collect benefits rather than return to work, who was capable of functioning but chose not to. She claimed the surveillance video was objective evidence that contradicted my subjective complaints. The first week of trial was devoted to medical testimony. Dr. Okonkwo testified for 2 full days, explaining lupus in detail, reviewing my medical records, explaining why my functional capacity was severely limited, despite sometimes appearing normal during brief encounters. "Lupus is called the great imitator for a reason," Dr. Okonkwo explained to the jury. "It can affect any organ system. Symptoms fluctuate dramatically. A patient can appear relatively well one day and be unable to get out of bed the next. Brief observations, whether by a physician or on video, are essentially meaningless for assessing overall functional capacity." On cross-examination, Patricia Morrison tried to suggest that my symptoms were exaggerated, that lupus patients can work, that I was simply choosing not to. Dr. Okonkwo, isn't it true that many people with lupus are able to work? Some people with mild lupus can work, yes, but Ms. Mitchell doesn't have mild lupus. She has moderate to severe disease with frequent flares, kidney involvement, and significant systemic symptoms. Her functional capacity is severely limited. But she was able to plant tomatoes for 90 minutes. On one day, after which she required 2 days of bed rest to recover. That's not consistent with the ability to work 40 hours per week. We also called Dr. Jennifer Martinez, a nationally recognized expert on disability evaluation and chronic illness. She testified that brief examinations like IMEs are notoriously unreliable for assessing functional capacity in episodic conditions. The gold standard for disability evaluation is longitudinal assessment, observing someone over time in their natural environment performing real-world activities. A 20-minute examination in an artificial setting tells you almost nothing about real-world functional capacity. Guardian Shield called Dr. Castellano to testify. David's cross-examination was devastating. Dr. Castellano, how much did Guardian Shield pay you last year? I'd have to check my records. Let me help you. According to financial records produced in Discovery, Guardian Shield paid you $487,000 in 2020. Is that accurate? That sounds approximately right. And how many IMEs did you perform for Guardian Shield in 2020? Perhaps 350 to 400. In how many of those examinations did you find the claimant capable of working? Dr. Castellano shifted uncomfortably. I don't have an exact number. Let me help you again. According to Guardian Shield's records, you found claimants capable of working in 287 out of 352 examinations. That's 81.5%. Does that sound accurate? If that's what their records show. Doctor, isn't it true that Guardian Shield is your single largest source of income? They're one of several insurance companies I work with. They account for approximately 60% of your annual income, correct? I'd have to verify that. Would you agree that if Guardian Shield stopped referring cases to you, it would significantly impact your income? I suppose so, yes. So you have a financial incentive to produce reports that Guardian Shield finds favorable, don't you? I provide objective medical opinions based on my examinations. Dr. Castellano, in your 22-minute examination of Ms. Mitchell, did you ask her how often she has bad days? I don't recall specifically. Did you ask her what activities she can sustain over an 8-hour period? The examination covered her functional abilities. Did you review her symptom diary showing 2 years of documented flares and limitations? I reviewed the materials provided to me. The materials provided by Guardian Shield, not by Ms. Mitchell or her treating physicians, correct? That's how the process works. Did you speak with Dr. Okonkwo, Ms. Mitchell's treating rheumatologist? No. Did you request her complete medical records? I reviewed what was provided. So you made a determination about Ms. Mitchell's functional capacity based on 22 minutes of observation, without speaking to her treating physician, without reviewing her complete medical records, and without asking about her typical daily functioning. Is that accurate? Dr. Castellano had no good answer. The surveillance video was the centerpiece of the trial. Guardian Shield played their edited 12-minute version, which made me look completely functional. Then, David played the investigator's full footage. 90 minutes showing all my rest breaks, all my careful movements, all the signs of pain and difficulty. The contrast was stark, devastating. The jury could see exactly how Guardian Shield had manipulated the evidence. Then, David called Marcus Webb, the investigator himself. Webb was uncomfortable on the stand. He explained that he'd been hired by Guardian Shield to conduct surveillance, that he'd followed me for 6 weeks, that he'd filmed my activities whenever I left my apartment. Mr. Webb, David asked, when you submitted your report to Guardian Shield, did you include a recommendation about how the footage should be used? Yes, I recommended that the July 28th footage should be presented with context, that it wasn't representative of typical activity, and that it showed an anomalous good day. Why did you include that recommendation? Because in my professional judgment, using that footage without context would be misleading. The subject, Ms. Mitchell, was barely functional most days. That one afternoon of gardening was the most active I'd seen her in 6 weeks. If you just show that footage without explaining that it was unusual, it creates a false impression. Did Guardian Shield follow your recommendation? No, they used the footage without any of the context I'd suggested. How did that make you feel? Patricia Morrison objected. Relevance, Your Honor. But Judge Walsh allowed it. It bothered me, Webb said. I've been doing this work for 15 years. I've always tried to be fair and accurate. When a client uses my work in a way that I specifically warned would be misleading, it reflects poorly on me and on the integrity of the investigative process. Guardian Shield's defense rested primarily on the argument that their decision was reasonable, based on the information they had. They argued that ERISA only requires reasonableness, not correctness, and that relying on an IME and surveillance video was within the broad discretion insurance companies have. But the internal emails undermined that defense. The jury could see that Guardian Shield hadn't just made a good faith mistake. They'd systematically targeted my claim, used a biased examiner they knew would find me capable of working, and deliberately used misleading video evidence their own investigator had warned them about. I testified on the 8th day of trial. David walked me through my entire story, my career, my diagnosis, my symptoms, my struggle to keep working, my financial devastation after benefits were terminated. "Ms. Mitchell," David asked, "why did you plant tomatoes that day in July?" "Because I was having a better day and I wanted to do something normal, something that connected me to who I was before I got sick. I knew I'd pay for it later, and I did. I was in bed for 2 days, but I needed to feel human." "If you'd known Guardian Shield was filming you, would you have done it?" "No, because I knew they'd use it against me. I knew they'd take my one good activity during my one good stretch and claim it represented my normal functioning. But I shouldn't have to be afraid to plant tomatoes on a good day. Having occasional good days doesn't mean I'm not disabled." On cross-examination, Patricia Morrison tried to suggest I was exaggerating. "Ms. Mitchell, you seem quite articulate and composed here in court today." "This is one of my better days. And I'm sitting down. I've taken my medications. If you asked me to work an 8-hour day tomorrow, I couldn't do it. But you could plant tomatoes for 90 minutes? On one day, yes. And then I couldn't do anything for 2 days. That's what episodic disability means. Good moments don't negate bad days." The trial concluded on March 26, 2021, after 2 weeks of testimony. Both sides gave closing arguments, then the jury retired to deliberate. They were out for 8 hours, 8 hours during which I sat in the hallway outside the courtroom, my stomach in knots, barely able to breathe. David tried to reassure me. "No matter what happens, you told your truth. You fought back. That matters." But it wasn't enough to just tell my truth. I needed the jury to believe me. I needed justice. At 4:47 p.m., the jury sent word they had a verdict. We filed back into the courtroom. The jury filed in. Judge Walsh asked the foreperson, a woman in her 60s who'd been a teacher, to read the verdict. In the case of Sandra Mitchell versus Guardian Shield Insurance Company on the claim for wrongful denial of benefits under ERISA, we find in favor of the plaintiff. Relief flooded through me, but there was more. We award the plaintiff $38,400 in past benefits owed from November 2018 through March 2021. That was the back pay they owed me. We award the plaintiff $115,200 in future benefits, representing 3 years of wrongfully denied payments. 3 years at $3,200 per month. That would give me time to stabilize, to figure out my life. On the claim for bad faith breach of contract, we find in favor of the plaintiff. We award $75,000 in compensatory damages for emotional distress. I was crying now. David squeezed my hand, and we award punitive damages in the amount of $2.4 million. The courtroom erupted. Patricia Morrison jumped to her feet, objecting. Judge Walsh banged her gavel for order. I collapsed into David's shoulder, sobbing. $2.4 million in punitive damages. The jury was sending a message. They were punishing Guardian Shield for what they'd done not just to me, but to everyone they'd targeted with these tactics. Judge Walsh polled the jury to confirm the verdict was unanimous. It was. Then she thanked them for their service and dismissed them. As the jury filed out, several of them looked at me with expressions of sympathy and validation. One woman, the teacher who'd been the foreperson, stopped and mouthed the words, "I believe you." Guardian Shield immediately filed post-trial motions asking Judge Walsh to overturn the verdict or reduce the damages. She denied them. They appealed to the 7th Circuit Court of Appeals. In September 2022, 18 months after the trial, the appeals court upheld the verdict in its entirety. The court's opinion was scathing. Defendants' systematic use of deceptively edited surveillance video to deny benefits to claimants with episodic disabilities, despite explicit warnings from its own investigator that such use would be misleading, constitutes the kind of willful, wanton misconduct that warrants substantial punitive damages. Insurance companies must not be permitted to profit from deliberate manipulation of evidence. I received my first payment in December 2022, 4 years after Guardian Shield had wrongfully terminated my benefits. The total with interest was $2.73 million. For the first time since 2016, I could breathe. I could afford my medications without rationing them. I could afford stable housing. I could afford food, utilities, basic necessities without panic. I paid back my parents every penny they'd lent me with interest. I donated $150,000 to the Lupus Foundation of America. I set up a fund to help other disability claimants afford legal representation. And I did something that surprised even me. I hired Marcus Webb, the investigator who'd tried to warn Guardian Shield about misusing the surveillance footage. Together, we started a consulting firm called Integrity Investigations. We work with disability attorneys across the country, helping them understand how surveillance video can be manipulated and how to combat deceptive practices in court. We've testified as expert witnesses in 23 cases so far. In each one, we've exposed similar patterns: insurance companies using edited footage, ignoring context, deliberately creating false impressions of claimants' capabilities. The publicity from my case led to investigations by insurance. Regulators in 6 states, 3 insurance companies have been fined for bad faith practices. Guardian Shield now includes disclaimers on all surveillance video submissions, acknowledging the footage may not be representative of overall functioning. It's not enough, but it's something. Today, I'm 44 years old. I still have lupus, I still have flares, I still have days when getting out of bed feels impossible. But I'm managing, I'm surviving, and I'm helping others fight back. My case set a legal precedent that's been cited in 62 subsequent disability insurance cases. It's taught in law schools as an example of insurance bad faith. It's referenced by disability rights organizations. But more than the legal impact, what matters most are the individual people whose lives have changed. The woman with fibromyalgia who didn't give up when her insurer showed edited surveillance of her grocery shopping. The man with chronic fatigue who knew to document everything because he'd heard about my case. The dozens of people who've told me that learning about my story gave them courage to fight. 6 months ago, a woman named Jennifer called me. She's 38, has multiple sclerosis, and her disability benefits had just been terminated based on surveillance video showing her at her daughter's wedding. "They filmed me dancing for 3 minutes," she said, her voice breaking. "They're saying that proves I can work full-time. They're calling me a liar." "I know," I told her. "I've been exactly where you are. But listen to me carefully. You're not alone. You're not making it up, and you're not powerless." I connected her with David, who's now considered one of the top disability attorneys in the country. I sent her information about documenting her condition, about demanding full unedited surveillance footage, about her rights under ERISA and state law. Last month, her insurance company reinstated her benefits before the case even went to trial. The threat of discovery into their surveillance practices and the specter of another verdict like mine was enough. That's the real legacy of my case. Insurance companies now think twice before using deceptively edited video. Attorneys know to demand full footage and investigator reports. Claimants know they have the right to fight back. Living with an invisible disability is already impossibly hard. You're constantly proving your illness to doctors, employers, family, strangers. You're constantly fighting assumptions that because you don't look sick, you must not be sick. You're balancing the need to stay as active as possible against the reality that overexertion triggers flares. Insurance companies exploiting that vulnerability, using your attempts to live as full a life as possible against you, is cruel beyond measure. And they count on you being too sick, too broke, too exhausted to fight. I'm here to tell you, don't give up. Don't let them silence you. Don't let them gaslight you into doubting your own reality. Document everything. Film your bad days even though it's humiliating. Keep symptom diaries even though it's tedious. Save every medical record even though the paperwork is overwhelming. Because when you're fighting a billion-dollar corporation, evidence is your only weapon. Find good people to stand with you. I couldn't have won without Dr. Okonkwo, who truly understood my condition and advocated fiercely. Without David, who believed me when Guardian Shield called me a liar. Without Marcus Webb, who had the integrity to blow the whistle on his own client's deceptive practices. Without Judge Walsh, who saw through the manipulation and gave me a chance to present my case to a jury. Without that jury of 8 strangers who listened, who understood, who believed, you need people who understand that invisible doesn't mean imaginary, that episodic doesn't mean fake, that having good days doesn't negate the bad ones, that functioning briefly doesn't mean sustained capacity. Today, I live comfortably. The settlement gave me financial security I never imagined, but more valuable than money is the peace of knowing I fought back and won, that I didn't let them break me, that I turned my suffering into something that helps others. I still have lupus, I still struggle, but I also have justice, I have vindication, I have proof that I was telling the truth all along. And I have the satisfaction of knowing that Guardian Shield and companies like them now think twice before using deceptive surveillance to deny legitimate claims. They know some people will fight back, some people will expose their practices, some people will win. Did you like my story? Which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If this story touched you, please consider supporting disability rights organizations in your area or contributing to lupus research and patient advocacy. If you or someone you love is facing a wrongful disability denial, don't give up. Seek legal help. Document everything. Demand your full surveillance footage if it exists. Know your rights. For more life stories like this, please like and subscribe to my channel. There are many other stories waiting for you, stories of courage, survival, and justice. Until next time.